the table, participants? Can
Yes,
you
sir.
see the table?
Yes, sir.
Okay, my target
Yes,
is
sir.
last two columns today. But before we go, what actually we discussed yesterday, let us have a summary. And you have this table, but still have a look. And we just like number one, you have one's classical Marshall, Pigou, Walra, and for Keynes, you have Keynes, Hicks, Hansen, Keynes for complete Keynesian. Actually, Keynes was writing something for which, from which the textbook authors developed Keynes simple Keynesian framework, complete Keynesian framework like this. It's one framework, and ISLM is something else actually. It's an admixture of Keynes and classical, and there is a lot of controversy which I'm not going into now. If question comes, we can come later on if time permits. Now we studied Say's law for classical, and for Keynes it is effective demand problem, and we have discussed at length why there is effective demand problem. Actually, I discussed three reasons for effective demand problem. One was the traditional Keynesian consumption function based argument. The second one was inequality based argument, and the third one was actually more important, that is class structure based argument. That is why there is always a possibility of effective demand in advanced capitalism. And then classical, we had the context was competitive capitalism, and for Keynes it was advanced capitalism, which is suffering from effective demand problem. So it's not just any so it's advanced capitalism is inherently suffering from effective demand problem. Number four, if you come, then obviously there are three markets, and if you consider bond, then you can say four markets, but you have to be careful. This bond market is not full-fledged share market. But for Keynes, you have simple Keynesian, obviously one market, in ISLM three markets, and in CKM four markets. And by bond, actually we mean full-fledged share markets. Then number five, perfectly elastic price, wage, and rate of interest general equilibrium. So there is no involuntary unemployment, but there could be voluntary unemployment. We know that. But in Keynes, there is involuntary unemployment, and if we come to CKM directly, then it is called actually underemployment equilibrium, because it's a peculiar general equilibrium where commodity market, money market, bond market are in equilibrium, but labor market is not in equilibrium, or in equilibrium, which is a specific type of equilibrium where there is underemployment or involuntary unemployment. And there is perfect inflexibility of price in SKM and ISLM, though the price is flexible in CKM, but money wage is rigid. Actually, there are different types of rigidities Keynesians are talking about. Now, this is very important. That classical economics is actually talking about a boom situation, an economy which is not in a recessionary situation, but simple Keynesian model and especially complete Keynesian model talks about recessionary situation, or at least a recovery kind of situation. It's not a booming situation, so that LM curve is positively sloped and AS curve is positively sloped. So there is room for expansion of output and employment. That is important. So if you look at complete Keynesian model, there is actually aggregate supply curve is positively sloped. This is very important. Means there is room for expansion in terms of employment and output. And LM curve is also positively sloped. So we are neither in the classical zone nor in the liquidity trap zone kind of situation in general. So, but ISLM is actually a tool to analyze CKM. It's essentially a tool which is giving us aggregate demand and different features of the aggregate demand curve. So 7 free market we had for classical, but here we know we have nominal rigidities, etc., and effective demand problem. So demand is less than supply in most of the cases like that. And employment, unemployment, we have already discussed. So basically for Keynes, it is excess capacity unemployment situation. And if you come to money, then in classical, there are 3 roles of money, three just functions of money, and one fundamental function is medium of exchange, where there is no store of value. The share market is not well developed, and that is the reason, the economic reason, that you have this kind of assumption. But for Keynes, in the West, in Europe or in the US, the share market is well developed. Now, if you come to the number 10, then we have already discussed the AS curve comes from labor market, or it's true for complete Keynesian model as well. But for complete Keynesian model, I have already discussed that labor market is upward. Labor market, we have underemployment equilibrium with money wage rigidity, and then that's why we have AS curve, which is upward rising. But for classical, it is vertical. But we have to mention that this classical aggregate supply curve is basically, we are talking about long run, whereas for Keynes, we are actually talking about short run. That is important, we have to keep in mind. And then if we come to 11, 12, 13, and 14, that is, it's basically, these are the things, AS curve, I'm not going into that. And then eddy curve, eddy curve is coming from, that's why ISLM is extremely important everywhere in all textbooks and all discussions, because for all the models here, then later on we'll have monetarism, we'll have new classical, we'll have new Keynesian, everywhere aggregate demand comes from ISLM framework. So, and aggregate demand is being determined through interaction between money market, bond market, and commodity market. So these are the things I think you have already gone through, and so I'm not going into this characteristics of AD, where it is a rectangular hyperbola, and you have different types of AD here. Especially you have aggregate demand is vertical when there is depression. This is a very important issue. This is a very important issue. When there is deep depression, aggregate demand is vertical. And with using this, we, in our last class, we discussed the futility of money wage cut, a very crucial issue, a very crucial point of debate or contentions, because it's a very highly contentious issue, that money wage cut. It's obvious, it's a very soft option in the hands of the capitalists even today. Whenever there is a crisis, what do? They actually cut money wage. But under depression, money wage cut won't help. That you need to understand, and for that Keynes is supremely important, complete Keynesian model, and that exercise of money wage cut is supremely important in that context. And I would humbly request my colleagues, the teachers who are present here, to tell, if they haven't, then only to tell the students the basic context or the controversy on money wage cut, because the general neoliberal argument is that whenever there is a crisis, then immediately the labor is chopped off, labor is retrenched, labor wage is cut, and people see it, what can be done, ki kora jabe, there is no option, so you have to bear it, it's pandemic or something like that. It's always a nagging thing like that, but it's absolutely unjustified given the macroeconomic theory. And the last one is very important. Here in classical, fiscal policy is completely ineffective, but fiscal policy is highly effective in all the cases, except the classical case in the vertical, when there is full crowding out effect, vertical LM, that is basically the classical case. Otherwise, everywhere fiscal policy is highly effective. And in monetary policy, in case of monetary policy, in the context of classical, it's inflationary, so it's very bad. But monetary policy, once again, is effective in all the cases, except deep depression. Monetary policy is ineffective. When I prime is equal to 0, that is IS curve vertical, which is once again a symptom of depression, and LM curve horizontal, where there is deep depression, acute depression, then only monetary policy, in that context, monetary policy is futile. Otherwise, monetary policy is effective. So these things we discussed. I suppose there's no question, but if there is any question which is very urgent, you can ask. Otherwise, I will skip. I will not skip. I'll go to the next slide after having 1 or 2 minutes on this. Last slide. So last, what we discussed, what were the problems of Keynes and classics? First of all, there was either short run for Keynes or long run for classics, and there was no comprehensive theory where you have both short run and long run, and especially a journey from one long run to other long run via short run fluctuations. So basically, we have to have a better theory in that context, they argue. Then another argument is that the Keynesian macroeconomics especially is devoid of micro foundation. Why there are certain ad hoc assumptions, there is no rationale for that, and that is a counter argument against Keynesian macroeconomics. And there was another argument which comes from the question of expectation formation and use of expectation. when the Keynesian consumer or the Keynesian producer is taking decision, he or she is becoming too naive in the sense that they are not considering the future while taking the decision for the present period. And that is heavily criticized by the modern macroeconomists. And they talk about incorporating expectation in current decision making, which comes when we go to monetarism. And the last one is an empirical thing that, Philip's curve was supplementing Keynesian macroeconomics. Because if you look at Keynesian macroeconomics, the upward rising aggregate supply curve, and allow me a few minutes because it is very important for today's class. Just a few minutes. What is there? Oh my God. It's the other development economics class. I'm sorry. I'm just gazing these things. Just allow me 1 minute. Can you see that?
Yes, sir.
File I'm just erasing things. It's unfortunate.
Yes, sir.
It is from my last Harry Stodaro class. So I'm just removing development economics. Okay. So what Keynesian economics actually told us, this is important for today's understanding of monetarism, because we have to spend a lot of time on monetarism, maybe 1 hour and the rest on the other two. Rest 45 minutes we'll spend on. We have 1 hour 45 minutes roughly. So 45 minutes we spend on monetarism and the rest on, say, another 45 minutes on the last two. So basically, Keynesian economics told us something like this. You had Y here, you had price here, and you had the aggregate supply curve like this and aggregate demand curve like this. And when there is an expansionary monetary and fiscal policy, then you have expansion in terms of output and employment. Employment is also rising and also rising price. So there was inflation and fall in. So inflation becomes from 0 to positive. So it rises, and there is a fall in unemployment because employment is rising. So unemployment is falling, and you have price here that is zero inflation to price here means price is rising, means pi is the rate of inflation that is becoming positive from 0. So pi is rising. So what we find is basically an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment from the Keynesian theory. Now you need for any theory empirical support, and interestingly it came from Philip's curve. And Philip's curve, we know, is basically an empirical relationship. So initially, Philip's curve, we had W dot by W here, but I'm replacing, and it was replaced soon by P dot by P. So it was initially P dot by, not P dot by P, W dot by W, because rate of change of money wage, but here it was later changed into P dot by P, that is rate of inflation. And here we had rate of unemployment, and Philip's got relationship. He took data, Philip's curve, that is empirical relationship. He took data and plotted the data, and he got something like this. So Philip's curve was actually an empirical support for the Keynesian theory. So that was a brilliant complement, COMPLEMENT, not PLIMENT, brilliant complement for Keynesian economics, which actually completes Keynesian economics with an empirical support. Unfortunately, the monetarist, that actually I was talking about when I was talking about the last point in our last class yesterday, that is this number 4, Keynes and Philip's curve can't explain stagflation. This last point actually today we are discussing. So when the monetarists came, unfortunately or fortunately, they took long period, very long period data instead of, and this was for Phillips, it was decadal data. But the monetarists took long period data and showed that, and they broke down the data into decades. They found that the decadal data, a second, could you please, just a second, please, excuse me, please. আমি একটা ক্লাসে আছি, হ্যাঁ পরে বলি। আমি একটা ক্লাসে আছি, আমি রাতের দিকে 11টার পরে ফোন করবো, 11টা সাড়ে 11টা। Okay, so basically they found that if we break down the data into decades, then the decadal data showed inverse relationship between rate of inflation and rate of unemployment. But if you take long period data, it's something like this. It's almost vertical. So the trade-off between inflation and unemployment vanishes, and what we find is basically a stagflation situation. That is what they found from data. Then the question they raised is, fine, in the short run, maybe there is a trade-off between inflation and unemployment, but in the long run, there is no such trade-off. So the trade-off between inflation and unemployment, may be true in short run, but not in the long run. That was the thing they derived through empirical research. That is the question they posed before the Keynesians. Now look what they were telling. Look, from your theory, above diagram, and from the Phillips curve, traditional old Phillips curve, what you are telling is fine. But what we find is something else, that if you take short period data, like Keynes talked about short run, and Phillips talked about short period data, that's fine. There is inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. But in the long run, there is no trade-off. And why it is important for policy, it's not a theoretical debate. Because if there is no trade-off, then any attempt to reduce unemployment, basically you are reducing unemployment. If Phillips curve is correct, then you can reduce unemployment at the cost of inflation. At the cost of inflation, fine, but you can reduce unemployment. But what they found, the monetarists actually, that you cannot reduce unemployment in the long run. It's a futile exercise to try to reduce unemployment. And at the end of the day, it's only inflation. So don't try to reduce unemployment at all. And once again, they actually question the very premise of government intervention. They say that government might be beneficial, government intervention might be beneficial so far as short-run reduction of unemployment is concerned, but ultimately it's a horrible thing because there is only inflation in the long run. And that's why, once again, they put a big question in front of government intervention. And that actually created a huge debate that how you should change macroeconomics, so that how you should change classical and Keynesian macroeconomics, so that you have a comprehensive one where we can have two, both short run as well as long run, because that is important to show that in the short run the target is this. So you need a macroeconomic framework which is a comprehensive one, in the sense, in the first criteria that we have, that you have to have both short run and long run, and you have to show the journey from one long run to another long run via short run. And finally, you have to show that maybe in the short run, there is a trade-off between inflation and unemployment, but in the long run, the trade-off vanishes, and government policy may be somewhat effective in the short run, but ultimately it's of no use. So that was the bone of contention. That once again, the question comes back after 1960s, that whether government intervention is actually beneficial or it's bad for the economy. So as I started the course yesterday, I told you that it's basically macroeconomics is fundamentally about government intervention. And for that, you need the theoretical framework. But if you don't analyze the political economy, then it's better not to teach or not to study macroeconomics. Then what we are teaching or what we are studying is basically some very stale thing which needs to be avoided. Okay, that was actually the question that was posited, that was posed by the monetarists. And what did the monetarists say? Monetarists, like the most fundamental, was Milton Friedman. And according to them, demand matters, but only in the short run. In the long run, it is only the supply that is important. And once again, they took competitive capitalism as their context. It is very peculiar. Writing in 1970s or 60s, they are going back to competitive capitalism once again, despite the intervention by Keynesians and Marxians. It is extremely peculiar, but unfortunately, it gained a lot of currency. So it was got a lot of acceptance actually. So, and according to them, demand matters maybe in the short run, but not in the long run. And they had once again commodity, money, bond, and labor markets, just as you had in the Keynesian system. Plus, they introduced something very interesting, where they introduced the question of expectation. So, instead of going through this table, I'll come back to this. We need to have how they change their equation system. Let us look at their equation system to understand the whole thing very briefly. So what were their contributions, or what were their point of intervention? First, they needed to produce a comprehensive theory where you have short run as well as long run. Number two, a journey. They needed to be, they had to explain a journey from one long run to another long run via short run. Then they had to incorporate this one, actually I'm talking about. They had to have micro foundation. Then they had to incorporate the issue of expectation. And then they had to explain the issue of stagflation, although not in the short run, but in the long run. So all these things they tried to handle with their intervention. And it was like this. So their commodity market, money market, this whole thing was like this. They had ISLM kind of framework for their demand side analysis. So we can have the equations like this, that you have actually I of R is equal to S of Y, that is commodity market. Then you had M by P is equal to L1 of Y plus L2 of R, L2 of R for money market. And then conjointly they actually they produce equilibrium for all the three markets. And very interestingly, we had an intervention in the labor market, and that is like this. They introduced, so the money market, commodity market, bond market, it's over. Now we have labor market, where their intervention was something like this. I told you that monetarism or criticism of Keynes or critics of Keynes demanded that a framework should incorporate expectation. Otherwise, it's incomplete, because future matters when I'm taking a decision for the present, even for the present. So one kind of expression could be like this. And then what we have, P is equal to PE, or not equal to PE, that is short run, in the short run, and P is equal to PE in the long run. So you see, we have long run, we have short run, we have expectation, and we have also micro foundation in case of labor market. Because the question was, why W is equal to W bar? That was extremely important target, or for the critics, that it's an ad hoc assumption. So they changed completely the money wage rigidity kind of thing. They brought in the classical type of situation. So this is ISLM actually. That's why I told you ISLM is extremely important. But there is a change. This is neither classical. The labor market is neither classical nor Keynesian. Classical plus Keynesian elements are there. More importantly, more of classical, but more importantly, there is the issue of expectation. P is expected price. Let me tell you what are the things. You know, labor supply is a function of expected real wage. So it's not actual real wage, it is expected real wage, while labor demand is a function of actual real wage. Because why? The understanding is that the workers do not know or have or I should say the capitalists have better information about their products than the workers. So the future price, why? Let us think like this. In July, I'm a worker in a university. I'm contracting with my employer for August wage. That is, say, this one. When I am actually um, contracting for this money wage, then I have to think about August price. Otherwise, I will be suffering from something called money illusion, what Keynesian workers were suffering from. Money illusion was a problem for the Keynesian worker. But here there is no money illusion, be very particular. So there is no money illusion, and the workers are actually maximizing their maximizing their utility by a choice between labor and leisure, and the corporate and the capitalists, and the firms and the capitalists are maximizing profit. So that is clear-cut micro foundation. There is no ad hocism like W is equal to W bar. That is one important issue. And finally, how do they handle the question of short run as well as long run? That in the short run, P is not equal to PE, but in the long run, P is equal to PE. So this is the innovation they made on ISLM framework. In ISLM framework, we had the first two equations, then the last three equations, we have our relationships, we have that is the intervention of the monetarist. You can say it is one interpretation of monetarism. There are various interpretations. Some kind of interpretation starts with this restatement of quantity theory, which is not right. If you actually study Friedman's famous American Economic Review, that 7-page or something article, then you would find that, or 17-page article, then you won't find that he is actually mentioning quantity theory restatement, etc., or even permanent income hypothesis that we discuss. But more importantly, he discusses what we are discussing here, or will be discussing here. Just a second, please. So this is the framework that you have to keep in mind, and with this, actually, we go to our next part. And another important aspect, why it is monetarism? Why money? You look at the debate every time people are dealing with money. Why? Where is the where has fiscal policy gone? Actually, 1960s, it is the Keynesian depression is gone. So it's a boom situation. So basically, we are having a situation like this, and we are not having a situation like this. This is 1960 situation where fiscal policy is ineffective. If you go to the next slide, then fiscal policy is ineffective. Fiscal policy is ineffective, and it is monetary policy which is effective. Now the monetarists, that's why target monetary policy. So what was their target? The point is very simple. The first, the monetarists are saying, look, our model incorporates both short run and long run. Number two, our model incorporates expectation. Number three, our model incorporates micro foundation. We are not going for ad hocism like W is equal to W bar. Just like classical, our worker is also rational. And we are incorporating expectation. And finally, with this, we will see they are trying to resolve the dichotomy between downward sloping Phillips curve and vertical Phillips curve. That is the dichotomy between short run trade-off between inflation and unemployment, and long run no trade-off between inflation and unemployment. So all the problems they are resolving with their framework. But when they are taking the policy variable, they're not looking at the fiscal policy, they're looking at the monetary policy. And that's why, as all of you know, you are either senior research scholars or your teachers, you know the famous saying of monetarists that money matters in the short run, not in the long run. Why it's not? Government expenditure matters in the short run, not in the long run, because government expenditure is already proved to be futile, because we are not having a situation like this. Or rather, in this situation, it is basically government expenditure that matters, but money supply hardly matters. You see, there is almost no impact when there is increase in money supply. And it is a depressionary situation where IS is vertical and LM is horizontal. Instead of that, it is a situation where it is called golden age of capitalism. It is post golden age. So golden age of capitalism is 40s, 50s, and 60s. And during that period, it's essentially money matters. If matters, it is money. If something matters, if anything matters, it's money, and it's not fiscal policy. And that's why the debate shifted towards money. That you have to be very clear about your expositions. Now, what did they say with their framework? So you have this equation system, and with this equation system, I'm not going into the details. If question comes, then I'll go into the derivation, etc., if I can, but which I teach in my general courses. But here I'll squeeze it down. So based on these things, they actually developed a framework which can be graphically represented with this diagram. So and here I must.
Yeah, please explain the diagram. I'm interested to know.
Pardon me?
Please explain this diagram. I'm interested to know.
Yes, I'll explain this diagram, definitely, bit by bit, but I'm not going into the derivation of the curves. Maybe, I don't know. I'll come to that, but before that, here I have to add one more thing. I have incorporated expectation, but what kind of expectation? That is very important. And the monetarists are actually talking about adaptive expectation hypothesis, that almost all of us know that they are not talking about adaptive expectation. They are talking about they are not talking about rational expectation. I'm sorry. They're talking about adaptive expectation hypothesis. That you have to keep in mind, and that will be challenged by the next school, that is the new classical school of macroeconomics. So with this, we go to the next, this diagram. Actually, I don't know. Let me check. No, I have not put. Just let me check. No, I have not put that derivation, but I have here. If anybody asks, then I can go to that discussion. There is another diagram for that. Is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Because it will take some time.
Yes, sir. Sir, it is visible. Can you zoom? It will be more better. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay.
Okay. So I'm not going into the second diagram now. It is dependent on the first one. So in textbooks we have this diagram, and there is a problem with when we go to this in the textbooks. I'll come to that and clarify. So basically, depending on this equation system, I know you know almost of all of you that we can have a short-run aggregate supply curve, something called short-run aggregate supply curve, and something called long-run aggregate supply curve. And what are the equations? We know many things, and that's why I'm skipping. Y is equal to yn bar. This yn is natural rate of output, or it is output consistent with the natural rate, and then alpha is a parameter, and P is the actual price, P is the expected price. So this is the equation most of us know, and we also know P is equal to PE. That means if P is equal to PE, then Y is equal to Y bar, and that is giving us the long-run aggregate supply curve, that is vertical. This is the long-run aggregate supply curve. We know that, just to repeat. And if P is not equal to PE, that is P greater than or less than PE, then Y greater than or Y less than YN, and we have a short-run aggregate supply curve, which is upward rising, because you see Y is greater than YN or less than YN as P rises above PE or below PE. That is when at this point, just there may be someone who is not so conversant. So for him or her, if PE is equal to P, we are here. You see, we are on the long-run aggregate supply curve. Now, if P rises, see, P is P1, and that's why we are here. Means what? P is higher than PE. PE is still PE not, but actual price is P1. So we have higher price compared to, so P is greater than PE, the first one inequality, this upper inequality. And then Y is greater than YN. That means we are moving along this direction. Y is greater than YN. And if P is less than PE, so Y is less than YN. That means what? If P moves away from PE, when does it happen? In short run. Where do we know? Here we have mentioned this. P not equal to PE means short run. P equal to PE means long run. Now, from this, we can derive this. Now, and obviously, using simple idea of mathematics, that if PE changes, that is a parameter changes, SRA shifts accordingly. If PE rises, what happens? If PE rises, Y falls, ceteris paribus, means leftward shift. So if PE rises, you see there is a minus here, and that's why Y falls. Ceteris paribus means what? SRH shifts. So there is a shift. Why does it shift? If PE rises, see, I have written here PEN. This is for PE naught. So what does this mean? Along this whole curve, PE is given. It's the operation of P. It is due to the movement of P, but not the movement of PE. But shift is because of the movement of PE. Now, I go to the basic economics. There is a model. The model, I'm not going into that. It will take a lot of time. I don't know I won't be able to cover or not. Better use economics. Why an economy goes from here to here very slowly. If there is any confusion, you please ask. So, just a second, please. First, we start with E naught. At E naught, what do we have? We have P, we have aggregate demand. This is aggregate demand curve is equal to short run is not equal to, sorry, is intersecting the short run aggregate supply curve as well as the long run aggregate supply curve. What does this mean? It means that first of all, from these two equations, we get aggregate demand curve. Means what? At each point on the aggregate demand curve, money market, commodity market, bond market are in equilibrium. Here, it's equilibrium. Here, it's equilibrium. Here also, it's equilibrium. And at each point on the aggregate supply curve, this derivation I am not doing, but I'm just telling you that at each point on the aggregate supply curve, we have this equality. Because just like classical, aggregate supply curve was derived in the 4-quadrant diagram that we had in our last class and in all the textbooks. Absolutely easy thing that we know that from the 4-quadrant diagram, just in the classical model, through labor market and then using the production function, we get the aggregate supply curve. It's exactly same plus something else which appears because of the operation of expectation that I'm going to discuss. Now here what is happening at E naught? At E naught, it's very interesting. There is long run, short run convergence. Means what? We are basically having this one with this one, not this one. So P is not equal to P is ruled out at E naught. Because you see P is equal to P, I have already mentioned at this point, P is equal to P. Means what? It is a long run equilibrium situation. So this is an initial long run equilibrium position which is at natural rate of output. Natural rate means in colloquially where there is basically two things. One, no involuntary unemployment, and two, there is no asymmetry between expectation and actual. There is no inequality, there is no asymmetry between what is expected and what is happening over there in the ground in the economy. So two things. It's different from full employment in this sense. In natural rate, when we are talking of natural rate, it's two things. Number one, there is no involuntary unemployment. Where can be voluntary unemployment? Just like classical. Plus, natural rate of output and employment means that you are at long run. Means there's no asymmetry, there's no inequality between expected and actual. That is extremely important. So we are ruling out this case when we are at Yn, and that is actually written here also, that when P is equal to PE, it is Y is equal to Yn. It is not Y not equal to Yn. It is neither Y greater than Yn nor Y less than Yn. So we are on the long run aggregate supply curve, and there that's why what we get 5 conditions satisfied. Or rather, I'm sorry, all the 4 conditions satisfied. One is I of R is equal to S of Y, M by P is equal to this, L of S is this. This is the third condition, and the fourth condition, that is the fourth condition. So the four conditions are satisfied at our small e naught. Now what is happening? Suddenly there is money supply increase. So money supply rises. I will be a bit slower at this point. Please try to listen carefully. Those who are not conversant, those who are conversant, absolutely, it's very easy. They have already understood it. So it's just an addition, nothing else. But in textbooks don't give this explanation properly at all. The general textbooks that I have gone through. There might be some textbook which I have missed, but all the textbooks that we use, Blanchard Fisher, Romer, Don Bush Fisher, Freund, Mankiw, whatever. Mankiw a bit better, but not fully okay. So what is happening? Here, it's a perfect peaceful situation, long run equilibrium, and suddenly there is some increase in money supply. So what happens? Money supply rises. And when it is money supply rise, it's basically not bond financed. It's the it's bond finance. That is the open market operations. We know OMO. So money supply rises. When money supply rises, then in the economy, supply of money is greater than demand for money. L1 plus L2, greater than that. So people are having, in the system is having more of money than what they require, following this first two equations, second equation rather, more of money supply, and this right hand side. So excess money, what do they do? Because they have the income, real income has not increased. Rate of interest has not changed yet. Just there is excess money. They simply dump this money in the bond market because there is bond, there is share market already developed. It's peculiar. They are talking about advanced capitalism, but they are taking it as a competitive capitalism. Advanced competitive capitalism. I don't know what is that. Must be something. So there is excess money which they dump in the bond market. So bond demand rises, bond price rises, and we know there is inverse relationship between price of bond and rate of interest. I don't have time to discuss that. That's a very interesting area. Then as bond price rises, rate of interest falls. As rate of interest falls, investment rises, and then that drives up aggregate demand. And that's why we have a shift of aggregate demand. That we know from our textbook ISLM framework. That needs no other further explanation, I suppose. Now aggregate demand shifts, and aggregate supply is like this. Why? Why output is rising initially, and then we are finding something like this? That is very important, and that most of the textbooks don't discuss properly. That is my perception. So when price is rising, actually there is an asymmetry. If you look at the third equation, there is this asymmetry where the workers know almost nothing about the actual price. They have to predict. They can only expect the price using adaptive expectation hypothesis. Well, whereas the capitalists know it much better than the workers. And in theory, we know we take extreme assumptions where it is expected and it is not. It's almost known. So what is happening? The price is rising. When the price is rising, workers don't understand that the price is rising. Say today morning, 10 o'clock, Reserve Bank of India did that increasing money supply. And very fast in this cyber world, everything is moving so fast that excess money supply is immediately put in the bond market. Bond price rises, rate of interest falls, and investment demand rises. And that drives up aggregate demand for goods and services, and that drives up price. But at this moment, I don't know anything as a worker that the price has increased. I don't know. I don't know anything like that. That the price has increased from 10 o'clock to 5 o'clock. During this period, I worked hard, but I didn't know that though my wage was just fixed, price has increased during the 7-8 hours. But the capitalists have understood it. May not be they have understood at 12 noon, but they have understood at 2 p.m. maybe. And that's why, what do? They increase demand for labor for tomorrow, because they know, what do they know? The workers know that wage is not changing, it is contracted. and their expected price is not changing because the actual price change is not percolating to them. They know nothing. So the labor supply remains the same, but suddenly the capitalists know that the actual price has increased. And that's why the real wage has actually fallen, but the workers don't know that. And as real wage has fallen, we know labor demand has to rise. We know labor demand curve is downward sloping from profit maximization, inverse relationship, because that is the MPL curve. So labor demand rises. When labor demand rises, so for tomorrow, tonight, say after 6 o'clock, I get an interesting news in the internet that a lot of companies are hiring for tomorrow. I'm talking about today and tomorrow. It's not today and tomorrow. It's longer period, just for telling like a story. I'm squeezing it. Tomorrow I find, my God, there is very interesting things going on. That there is actually increase of hiring tomorrow. And as soon as there is increase in hiring, it's a free market competitive economy. So I tell my wage should increase. Why should I work more? Or somebody else is maybe voluntarily, he or she was there staying for or waiting for job. He or she would argue that you are willing to hire, but you have to pay more. And I was voluntarily unemployed because the prevailing wage on the 22nd of July was not appropriate for me. And that's why I was not in the job. Now you want me in the job market tomorrow. You want me in the job. You want me to get employed. You want me in your job, in your factory. Fine. You have to pay me more. Obviously, that is the reason why I was not working on 22nd of July. If you want me to work in 23rd of July, on 23rd of July, you have to pay me more. So money wage rises. We are so happy, but we don't know that price has in between increased during the horrible day of 22nd of July. We only know at the end of 22nd of July, maybe tonight, that I would come to know that there is a lot of hiring and the wage is rising, and we are so happy that tomorrow everyone is supplying more of labor. So labor supply rises. So what you find? Labor demand is rising, labor supply is rising. But this I cannot prove mathematically, but it could be proved with diagram if I'm discussing that. Unfortunately, to save time, I'm not, but I'm just giving you the basic thing that this rise in wage will be less than. Why I'm raising my labor supply? Because money wage is rising. It can be shown very clearly that rise in price, this rise in price, I think you can see my cursor, this rise in actual price is actually more than the rise in wage. So finally, despite rise in wage a bit tonight, for tomorrow, there is fundamentally a fall in real wage, and that's why tomorrow's extra hiring sustains, remains. I repeat, today morning there was a wage, there was a price, but during the whole of today, this 22nd of July, because of increase in money supply, bond demand increased, price of bond increased, rate of interest fell, investment increased, aggregate demand increased, which has driven up price, but I don't know anything. And as price increase is known to the capitalists through, say, PricewaterhouseCoopers or Bloomberg, they have immediately got the information. They know it is actually they're gaining because the money wage is given. Now the real wage has fallen, and that's why they go for hiring spree. Fantastic hiring information is spreading, is flooding the internet, and people are rushing. And this hiring spree is raising some wage. But of course, it can be shown that this rise in wage is much less than, still much less than the rise in price. So that finally there is a fall in real wage, and finally there is an increase in labor demand. Just a second, please. Hello. এই আমার না এখনো লেকচার চলছে জানেন, হ্যাঁ একটা লেকচার চলছে, প্লিজ আপনি কালকে এই সময় করুন, আমি সরি, এক্সট্রিমলি সরি। স্যাটারডেও এই সময়, হ্যাঁ আমার প্রত্যেক দিন শনিবার রবিবারও ক্লাস, হ্যাঁ আপনি হ্যাঁ আমার একটু, আপনি এই সময় করুন, একদম ঠিক সময় করেছেন। আমি মানে একটু ভুল হয়ে গেছে, কালকের দিনটা আজকে একটু ওভারশুট করে গেছি। কালকে এই সময় করুন, পরশু করুন, কোনো অসুবিধা নেই। প্লিজ আমি একটু সরি, আমি একটু ঠিক আছে, আচ্ছা রাখি তাহলে। হ্যাঁ, ক্লাস চলছে তো। হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, okay. So basically there is rise in labor demand, and unfortunately the workers can see only this. They can't see rise in price, and they are thinking that their expected real wage is rising, and that is called workers' misperception. Because of workers' misperception, they also tomorrow I will be increasing my labor supply, knowing actually that my real wage has fallen. I'm thinking as if my real wage is rising, but actually real wage has fallen, but I'm being befooled by asymmetric information. And this is called workers' misperception framework. And as labor supply is rising, labor demand is rising, employment is rising, output is rising, and we are moving from E0 to E1, so that we have a rising output. If there is any question, please ask.
No, sir. একদম ক্লিয়ার।
Okay. এইটা বইয়ে এত পরিষ্কার করে, I'm sorry, in books I haven't ever found it so clearly written. It is actually, we have developed, I won't say I alone, I with along with me, along with my ex-colleague Professor Ranjan Nag, we actually developed this kind of framework on our own, and then found in different books bits and pieces, and what we found that what we understood that what we are telling is most probably correct. So actually, so we are moving from here to here, and that's why short run, what triggered this increase in price? What happened? Increase in output. And what is that relationship? Short run aggregate supply curve, and that's why it is short run aggregate supply curve is upward rising. Supply curve is what? A relationship between output supplied, output produced, and price. Of course, optimization, etc., are inherent. It's not any price and any quantity relationship. There is optimization, and we have optimized, because this equality actually talks about optimization. This equality also talks about a kind of optimization as well, these two equalities. So it's optimization, because these are equilibrium, etc., we are talking about. It's not disequilibrium, it's equilibrium. And that is the logic we are skipping. We actually deal this through diagram, etc., in our classes, but I'm skipping because the logic is, I suppose, is okay. So that's why this. And what is happening here? Price is not equal to the actual price is not equal to expected price. So which one we have? We have this case actually. This case. It's not the long run. Not the long run, because we are violating this now. P is not equal to P. When we are here, try to understand. We are having labor market equilibrium. We are, because this is rising, this is sliding, this equality is maintained. And we are on aggregate demand, because these two equalities are maintained. So we are on new aggregate demand, we are on aggregate supply, means we are having this equality. This is rising, this is not rising, not the case. Both rising simultaneously, and the equality is maintained. So equilibrium is maintained in labor market. So here we have all three markets equilibrium, like classical. Labor market equilibrium, money market equilibrium, four markets, I'm sorry. Money market, bond market, commodity market, labor market equilibrium. So this is all the four markets are in equilibrium. But this is not satisfied. Rather, this is satisfied. I think it's clear. And when do you have this? When we have short run. And that's why this is called short run general equilibrium. This is initial long run general equilibrium. This is transient short run general equilibrium. So E1 is a short run general equilibrium, because the last condition is not satisfied. This condition is not satisfied. This is rather satisfied, which is valid for short run, but this is valid for long run. I think this is clear. Just please hold on. ঠিক আছে, কি সমস্যা আছে? না না না, সমস্যা নেই তো। এসেছে, বিরিনোয়া এসেছে, আসবে না কেন? আগে নিয়ে লেখেন। ও 7টা বেজে গেছে, ওরে বাবা। ঠিক আছে। This is the toughest part for me that I have already discussed, because without that diagram and long hours of discussion, it is extremely difficult to convey. So the whole economic story. So this is actually initial long run position, and this is actually a short run equilibrium position, where please keep in mind at E1, 4 markets are in equilibrium, but there is asymmetry of information. So workers increase their labor supply because they are befooled by the system, market, where there is asymmetry of information. And I'm not going into the equation for adaptive expectation, but I'll be using adaptive expectation now. Now what happens? Then slowly tomorrow, say 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, the information starts to percolate that, oh my God, our wage had increased. I'm talking about the workers, but price has also increased. When they start going to the market and they start talking about buying commodities, they understand that they have been befooled. The price has actually increased, and they have been befooled. They didn't know. And their little increase in wage is nothing compared to very large rise in price. Immediately, maybe tomorrow, we all come to know that there is a serious problem, and we start our union meetings over internet. And say 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, we understand that we have been befooled. And immediately we start with a very steep bargaining with the employers that what we have been doing on 23rd of July is very bad, because our real wage came down from 22nd of July, and that's why you actually hired more of labor. You have to increase money wage, otherwise there will be breach of contract, because it is labor. It's a fall in real wage at the cost of which actually we are working. So money wage has to be increased further. Now there is a cost of production increase, and that cost of production increase is actually pushing the supply curve. But how does it operate? So what are they telling? They are telling that price has increased, but my expected price is remaining the same. They first of all, among their meeting, within their meeting, they discuss, we need to revise the expected price, and it has to be made equal to the actual increased actual price. So they push up the price. And first they push up the price, this price, to make it equal to the actual new actual price. They push up. And as they push up by a large amount, this large amount, they find that it's a fall in real wage. And they go for a bargain that money wage has to increase. So they are basically pushing for a cost push for the firms. And what we know from our microeconomics, when there is a cost push, the supply curve shifts to the left. So that is happening. The supply curve is moving to the left. And this is finally the supply curve. There is a whole process. I'll come in the next diagram. I'll come to that. But first, they go to this. And this is the new supply curve, demand curve situation. And here, once again, you have the equality means long run. Here you have once again money market, commodity market, bond market, labor market, equilibrium, plus no asymmetry, where new actual price is equal to the new expected price. That is, this equation is satisfied. So we are going from long run to short run, long run to long run via short run. That means what we have done, number one, we have discussed both long run and short run, and the journey from one long run to another long run via the short run. Number one. Number two, we have incorporated micro foundation. It's not ad hocism, it's micro foundation. Number three, we have incorporated information processing and problems and resolution of the problems. And then number four, we have resolved the problems of dichotomy between the trade-off between inflation and unemployment in the short run, and no trade-off between inflation and unemployment in the long run. That's why we have to come. For that, you have to come here. But from here, it's clear. So from in the short run, you are raising output and employment. Means what? Unemployment is falling, but there is rise in price. So inflation and fall in unemployment. But in the long run, there is only inflation. And you know Phillips curve. So actually, we are moving from here to here. This E1 is actually corresponding to this E1. and this E naught is actually corresponding to this E naught, and this En is actually corresponding to this En. So the movement, exactly the mirror image is this movement, where you find in the short run there is an inverse relationship between rate of unemployment and rate of inflation, but in the long run it vanishes. So the monetarists were saying that maybe through increase in money supply, you were successful for just one day or 1 month, or maybe for a walk or a quarter or 6 months, but ultimately it's only inflation. So don't give a push. Don't go for expansionary monetary policy. And fiscal policy is already futile because it's a boom situation. And there will be full crowding out effect that we have discussed a few minutes back. So it's futile to go for monetary intervention. In the short run, money may matter, but in the long run, it doesn't matter. It's only inflation. It's a futile thing. And don't go for that. With this, I stop here. But if you have any question, you can ask. Otherwise, I go to the it's not complicated. It's an extension of this diagram. If there is no question, then I can go. Actually, what is happening is this. This is from E0, I'm going to E1, and the workers actually are befooled where P1 is greater than P0. Is that fine? Shall I go to the slide?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
The earlier one was okay. So I was going to the next slide. So actually, I have not broken down. If you break down the movement, then you get this diagram. So you go from this, the price is P1, the workers first understand it's P1, they go for a push, and the aggregate supply curve becomes this, and the new price is this, and then they understand the new price is this, they go for another push, they go for another push. So it's so adaptive expectations. The workers are adapting to the situation. The workers do not know ex ante what is going to happen. As it happens, they adapt. They raise their money wage. They go for a push, and accordingly the supply curve shifts, and we move to En as we had in our earlier diagram. So the earlier diagram, this earlier diagram could be broken down into these two diagrams. Okay. Can I move, or you need some explanation? Have a look, think, and if you have any question, you can ask. So money matters in the short run, but through successive rounds of adaptations, the workers understand that they have been befooled, and they adjust slowly. They grapple with the information. They actually try to have command over information, try to process the information, and finally they understand what is that. When we used to download our photographs in internet earlier, when internet speed was low, slowly, byte by byte, we used to download the photographs. It's like that. Slowly, adaptive expectation is exactly like that. So a photograph you are downloading, and it will be downloaded and visible in front of you fully, but it will take some time, and it will happen bit by bit, byte by byte, slowly, step by step. Exactly that is happening in adaptive expectation, in the world of adaptive expectation hypothesis of 1970s. Clear? Any question?
Sir, I have a question.
Yes, please.
Sir, could you just get back to the diagram, that previous one? Yes, sir. So, like in the later part, you have just said once, like, with the help of the trade union, if the laborers, they are updated with the information.
Yes.
So, will that situation, like, will have, bring changes in the equilibrium, like position, like the long run, which you have shown, sir?
Pardon me, I couldn't follow. Could you be a bit louder?
Yes, sir. Sir, am I audible now? A little louder?
Yes, you're audible, but bit louder, please.
Okay, sir.
Yes.
Sir, like in the later part, like you have told that once the laborers, with the help of the trade unions, if they are updated with the information that the wages has been, increased,
Right.
so with
Not
that
wages,
situation,
prices have
prices,
increased, and that's why
yeah,
wages need to be increased
yeah.
further.
So in that case, sir, will that in the initial like equilibrium position, that's the long run, which you have shown, like
Not
will it
this
get
one,
the
this
yes,
one or
yes, yes,
this one.
yes, sir, yes, no, later on, yeah, this one, sir.
This E naught.
Yes, sir.
This is E naught.
So will this be changed, sir?
Yes, it is going to En. It's not coming back here. It's going here. So this equilibrium position is not reached because money wage has increased, price has increased, but the
Yes,
actual
sir.
real wage has been regained. What is happening? Let me tell you. First, this price rises. Second, this wage rises. But this real wage has finally fallen. But workers understand that they have been befooled. So they go for another round of push for rise in wage so that the earlier real wage is regained. When the earlier real wage is regained, then earlier labor demand is regained, earlier labor supply is regained, earlier employment is regained, earlier output is regained. And what was the earlier output? Natural rate of output. So the natural rate of output is regained, but at a higher price. Try to understand. Initially, first step, price rises. Second step, real wage falls, labor demand rises. First, price rises. Second, real wage falls. Third, labor demand rises. Fourth, money wage rises, but by a lesser proportion compared to rise in price. So actually real wage has fallen. So labor demand still remains higher compared to the initial situation. Come to this. Money wage has not changed. Money wage has increased by a small amount, but real wage, expected real has increased because of this rise in money wage. That pushes up the labor supply. So on the one hand, labor demand has increased, labor supply increased. So total employment rises, total output rises, and here you move from small e naught to small e1. That is short run. Then workers understand that they have been befooled. So they go for another round of push so that, how much of push? So that 22nd July 10 a.m. real wage is restored. So the real wage on 22nd of July at 10 a.m. is equal to the real wage of 24th of July 10 a.m. Means what? The initial real wage is regained. So the initial labor supply will be generated, initial labor demand will be generated, initial employment will be generated, and the initial output will be generated. But all these will happen only at the cost of rise in price and wage. And that's why output does not change, but prices change. Is that clear now?
Yes, sir. Very clear,
Or
sir.
I
Thank you.
haven't understood your question? Is that okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So it will not be anywhere else. It will be here because the initial real wage is regained. In many of the books, some of the books, it's written like the movement like this, but these are actually dependent on other effects, which unfortunately I don't have time to explain. But in this diagram, or in this case, the simplest case, this is the case that you reach En, not any other point. Okay, and that's why the monetarists are saying that it's stagflation without any change in output and employment. It's only inflation. Okay. So this is the step-by-step thing using adaptive expectation hypothesis. Now, that's why they say money matters in the short run and not in the long run. And what is the political economic implication? The fundamental target of these two lectures: don't intervene. It's government once again is proved to be a nuisance. Now we go to monetarism, and what did we find? We had all these things. You have this monetarism. So all these things you see, I have already discussed, and the equations, etc. And then finally, aggregate demand comes from ISLM. So Any downward sloping as usual, you have seen. Fiscal policy ineffective as LM, vertical boom discussed. No question of fiscal policy. That's why money matters in the short run, although not in the long run. Short run inflation unemployment trade-off, but in the long run, no such trade-off. So it's over. Now we go to the next slide as usual. So what are the problems with monetarism? So monetarists have satisfied us with this, fine. Monetarists have satisfied us with this, fine. Monetarists have satisfied us with adaptive expectation hypothesis, fine. They have also satisfied us to resolve the dichotomy between the concerning the inflation unemployment trade-off, short run and long run. So long run, there is no dichotomy, there is no, there is no inverse relationship, there's no trade-off, there's no trade-off in the long run between inflation and unemployment, although there may be a trade-off between the between inflation and unemployment in the short run. So it's ultimately futile. But there was a critique of monetarism, that what you have been doing is too naive. Why? Because what you have been doing is ad hoc expectation without proper utilization of information, and that was the famous Lucas critique. What was the Lucas critique? The Lucas critique was this, that in adaptive expectation, this is the equation actually, where PET plus 1, tomorrow's price when we are expecting, or that is PE for tomorrow the worker is expecting, the worker, he or she is actually depending on past prices, I running from 0 up to n. That is PT, PT minus 1, PT minus 2, PT minus n. So what is important here? Future price, expected price, is dependent on only past prices, nothing else. And Lucas' critique is that, can the agents, the rational agent, can be so irrational while utilizing information? Because we know price is dependent on so many factors. And how can you say that, just a second, please. And how can you say, so the adaptive expectation expression, as you have seen, that how can you say that future price is only dependent on the past prices? So actually what adaptive expectation was doing, in very simple language, I'm sorry, you have to bear with my horrible handwriting and horrible drawing skills. There's almost no skill. So this is past, this is today. Say T is equal to 0. This is today. These are the past prices. So here you are measuring, you are just plotting prices, and you are actually getting the points here and here. So from there you have done the regression based on data, and then you have this. So adaptive expectation, what it will do, it will simply extend it and say this is the price. Rational expectation would say, how can you say like that? Say we have a pandemic at this moment, how can this be the price? It should be something like this, or even it could be something like this. Or some people could say, no, because of pandemic there is a huge supply shock, and that's why the prices are going to be like this. There's a huge supply shock. Agriculture, there is a supply shock. Informal sector is a fantastic supply shock because there is no work from home, unfortunately, in these sectors. Forget about working from home. So you have to take into account future possibilities, current and future possibilities. And you are too naive. This is called naive expectation. That's why you become too naive if you just focus on past prices. Rather, you have to have an equation like this, where the future price is a function of past prices, all the variables which could affect future price, all the future variables expected, their expected values, all the future parameters, and all the policy parameters, government expenditure parameters, and all possibilities, and money supply. So expected money supply, expected government expenditure, expected changes in the parameters of the system, whole system we are talking about, not only economics, it's economics, society, polity, everything, international relations, and variables that could affect the future price. So you have to take into account all these together, optimize over this information resource. So why you are only optimizing over budget, or why you are optimizing over only your cost? and you are not optimizing your over your information, available information set. Whatever is available, they are not telling that you have to have information about earthquake. Whatever is available, why you are wasting information? How can you waste being a rational individual? And that is the famous Lucas critic. And the Lucas is saying that every individual actually would take into account this information and possibility of changes. So how can you say that they are so naive? And that's why there is rational expectation school and new classical macroeconomics. Is that clear? Pardon me? Not audible at all.
Theta t plus 1 expected value. What is this? Hello, sir.
Could you please write down?
Okay, sir.
Could you please write down? I cannot hear anything. Could you please write down in the chat box? Oh, theta. Theta is basically parameters. These are variables and these are parameters of the system. Economic, non-economic, political, social, everything, parameters. And these are the variables of the system. That is within the economic, within your model. You can say you are bringing a model, you are preparing a model. In that model, you are considering certain variables, which are actually your endogenous to the model. And there are certain parameters. You have to, when you do econometrics, you have to take information on those parameters as well. Not only your variables. Say you are saying that price is dependent on X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F, something like that. And there are certain parameters as well. So you have to take into account the information that actually predict the parameters as well. First, you have to predict the parameters, and based on that prediction, you have to predict the future price, the values of the parameters, future values of the parameters, future values of the variables. You have a model, and in that model, you have some variables and parameters. You have to predict the values of the variables, you have to predict the values of the parameters, and based on that, you have to predict the values of the prices. And that is what is done by all these information processing agencies like Bloomberg. Is that clear?
Yes,
is that
sir.
clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is the intervention, and with this actually we go to the new classical. And if you look at new classical, everything is same. This is famous Lucas, Robert E. Lucas Jr., who got Nobel Prize in most probably 1988, and Milton Friedman also got Nobel Prize. And then you have actually almost everything similar to monetarism, except you have rational expectation. That is very important. And what you have by rational expectation, what are the changes that we have because of rational expectation in the equation system that we have earlier? So instead of AEH, now we have REH, rational expectation hypothesis. And there, what we have is actually this, where I of R is equal to S of Y, all the same, M by P is equal to L1 of Y plus L2 of R, all the same. And then you have LS function of W by PE is equal to LD function of W by PE, but you have only P is equal to PE in both short run and long run. There is no dichotomy between short run and long run. It's always, because in rational expectation, whatever is knowable is known to you. If there is no unpredictable, unanticipated, sudden, uncalled for shock, without that, if there is no such shock, which is absolutely bizarre, otherwise, whatever is knowable is known to the workers. Every worker is like an economist. Every capitalist is like an economist. Everyone knows the model that we were discussing. So this model is known to everyone. Please try to understand this. Everything is known to everyone. And so if they can gauge, if they can measure this, oh, this will be the change in demand, they would immediately know that this will be actually the position, final position. So this will be actually the price. So accordingly, my wage will be WN. It's no more W naught. W naught was consistent with P naught, but Wn is consistent, is equal to actually what you have here. W naught by P naught is equal to Wn by Pn. That is the bargaining. Somebody was asking this question and I answered. So much so that W will be pushed up, so much so that this is equality. They know ex ante. They know when they know everything. So today morning itself, I knew everything. So today I won't wait for 2-3 days, because money supply was introduced at 10 o'clock. Even before that, I know everything, because information asymmetry is not there. Bloomberg knows this, gives me an SMS. Oh, money supply is going to increase. So I have bargained for you for a higher wage. You pay me some money, obviously, for this consultation, and the consultancy charge will be there. But your money wage is this. You please bargain with your employer so that you have your money wage as WN, not W naught. So I simply text text to my employer that now on, if you want me, you have to give me WN, so that WN by PN is equal to W naught by P naught. So when I join at 10 o'clock today, when I joined actually, then government supply is increased, money supply increases, but it's futile, but because immediately I will shift and this push up this aggregate supply and I'll be here. So it's a movement like this.
Sir, that means there is a movement directly from E naught
Yes,
to EN.
not to E1, even in the short run.
And there is no existence of E1.
No, there is no existence. The trade-off completely vanishes.
Vanishes, okay.
And that is the policy, famous policy irrelevance result. Policy and the government, bolte parche na to, that they cannot say that the government is irrelevant. It's too much. They say policy irrelevance.
Mm-hmm.
Any question? So basically, the economy is moving from E naught to E1, En in one go. And the policy is completely irrelevant. And what is important in rational expectation, if there is no unanticipated shock, then it is as if the whole economics that we are discussing today in today's discussion, that is known to every worker in a country. That is the thing. And if it is not known, there are agencies to let them know, to inform them at a cost, at a price. That's the thing. Actually, what is happening, let me tell you, it's something like that. 6 o'clock morning, I get an information that money supply is going to increase. Immediately, another information comes that this is the amount of increase in money supply. And then I go for bargaining. 8 o'clock, actually, my union sets the wage at WN instead of W naught. So already what is happening, do you know, before 10 o'clock, no more this is the aggregate supply, this is the aggregate supply. So 10 o'clock, at 10 o'clock, this is the aggregate supply, this is no more the aggregate supply. Rather, we are here, had there been any demand. But at 10 o'clock, the money supply is introduced, so demand goes here, and that's why we move straight away here. Hypothetically, this was the case. This was the aggregate supply at 10 o'clock. But at 10 o'clock, when money supply is introduced, immediately aggregate demand goes here. So I go from, or we go from E naught to En. Is that clear? It's horrible. Yes.
No, sir, it is clear.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Yes, sir, clear.
Okay.
Clear, sir?
So here also, the same thing. From here, you immediately, under rational expectation, without unanticipated shock, you simply go here. Now, I have a question. I won't discuss it, but I think it will be clear to all of you. If there is unanticipated shock, could you please tell what will happen if there is unanticipated shock? Like government does not tell anyone, like demonetization. what will happen? I'm talking about something which is announced policy change, anticipated policy change, announced policy change. And then we are going from E naught to En in one go, be it the left side diagram, be it the right diagram. But if there is unanticipated shock, like demonetization, what will happen? Even on the rational expectation.
So
I leave it to
this
you.
will all.
Yes, please.
So
Please,
this will
go ahead.
alter the demand curve, sir.
The one line answer is, it is exactly what I discussed under monetarism. Because it is no more rational expectation. Sudden change, I didn't know anything, so I have to know bit by bit through adaptations. Rational expectation does not work under unanticipated shock. So the question comes, do you understand? It's exactly what we discussed. Just copy and paste when there is unanticipated shock, what I discussed under monetarism. Okay? Now the question is, oh, then why policy irrelevance? Is Lucas a fool? Was Lucas a fool that policy is irrelevant? Policy is relevant. Sorry. Policy is relevant. Go for unanticipated shock. Demonetization is very good. It is not demonetization, because demonetization will be actually this one, from here to here. Economy is shifting this way because demand is, money supply is falling. So that's the reverse. We'll go to that. But before that, say there's a sudden shock. It's not known. So go for that. This generates good result. Output rises, employment rises. So why don't the governments go for that? Sudden changes. There is the famous Barrow critique of that. If the governments go on doing that, bluffing, then the very foundation of democracy is at stake. You can't fool your people continuously. You can't generate bluffs continuously. Generating bluff is anti-democracy. And that actually questions the very, very, very existence of state. Rashtra, state with capital S. So theoretically, with unanticipated policy shocks, you can generate inflation unemployment trade-off. But you should avoid this, because democracy, if you want to have a vibrant, meaningful democracy, credible democracy, you should not do that. And that actually destroys the very foundation of democracy. And that is the famous Barrow critique against unanticipated shock. Is it clear?
Sir,
Yes, sir.
sir, I have a doubt.
Yes, please.
Yep. So the literature mentions two types of rational expectations, weak form and strong form. So would these two forms have different implications on policy-wise?
Yes, because it's simple. Because weak form means you are not considering everything.
And that is more realistic.
That is more realistic. So actually it will be something like this. E naught to En is theoretical. The movement will be like this.
All right.
Monetarism, this will be the movement. Sorry. Monetarism, this will be the movement. And the partial one will be this. And this is a bit unrealistic. But you know, theory, when we contrasting cases we put, and then we go for the linear combinations of, like monopoly and perfect competition. The extreme cases first we teach, and then we go for oligopoly. The chapters are arranged like that.
Okay.
So that is the famous Barrow critique. Don't go for that. So what do you have at the end of the day? It's horrible that government becomes completely redundant, because There is competitive capitalism. There is no rigidity. It's frictionless macroeconomic framework. It's a frictionless, micro foundation based, rationality based, rational expectation based macro foundation where everyone knows everything. It's a peculiar assumption. First of all, the competitive economy is a fantastic assumption, I would say. It's a peculiar assumption. Sitting in 1980s, you are talking about, or 90s, you are talking about rational expectation, competitive equilibrium. These are bizarre things, and that has been proved in 7, 8, 9 crisis. Nothing worked. And after that, and that's why I'm avoiding 2000 plus, post 2000 discourses, because macroeconomics is in a very disarrayed condition now. And the mainstream macroeconomics, non-mainstream macroeconomics is thriving, but mainstream macroeconomics is really in a very bad situation. People are doing it fine, but not everything percolates to us, but it's in a very bad situation. And for that, I would request everyone to read a very simple article in a very not so polished publication. That is one publication. I don't know how many of you are from the state. If you are from the state, somehow please try to collect a copy of, I don't have that, otherwise I would have provided you, that Alumni Association of Calcutta University Economics Department, they published a book last year. This year they have published one. Last year, that is the centenary year. There we have an article, very small, very unassuming article by Professor Somen Sikdar, who was a teacher in Calcutta University, and then for a long time he was in IIM. He retired just a few months back, on the crisis of macroeconomics. It's very unfortunate that 2008, 9, 10, there was a deep crisis which actually raised fundamental questions about new classical macroeconomics and monetarism, but unfortunately new macroeconomics is not coming up in a big way. So that is a big area where in the West people can work actually. But World Bank and especially IMF hegemony is a detrimental thing for development of macroeconomics, because they don't want macroeconomics to deviate from that policy irrelevance result, because they want minimum governance everywhere. Everywhere the slogan is minimum government, maximum governance. I think you know that. So, and that is an hegemonic idea. And if you read that article, and then my teacher is actually very much astonished to see that when Great Depression happened, we had great theories, but when another kind of Great Depression happened, we don't have any development of macroeconomics. Maybe macroeconomics as a whole is stifled, suffocated, and it's not being allowed to develop. Now with this, we go to the last school of thought for our lecture, and that is New Keynesian macroeconomics. And where do they differ is this. So what was the critique of actually Keynes? Critique about Keynes. The critique was this, that there is ad hocism. So new class Keynesians actually they are very interesting. They take every assumption, even competitive capitalism, and they take rational expectation. They take all the assumptions of new classical macroeconomics. They take everything, but where do they differ? That is very important. They say that there are certain competitive capitalism with a variety of rigidities that are inherent in a market economy. It's inherent in a market economy owing to transaction cost, uncertainty, decentralized decision making, etc. And that is fundamental. If you read on your own, there are certain corrections actually here. When you read this, let me tell you, not corrections actually written. You have to be careful while you read this one. This is actually, and there is no information asymmetry. Oh, this one is the main part. Actually, everything is this perfectly flexible price, wage, etc. This is a general statement when you read, because you have this table with you. This is a general statement they are making, but they are adding that prices are finally rigid, money wage is finally rigid, rate of interest is finally rigid because of certain fundamental rigidities. So quickly, because I don't have much time, 20 minutes left. So quickly, what the new Keynesians are saying is that Keynes was right, but Keynes was devoid of micro-foundation. Keynes was devoid of expectation, processing expectation, proper use of expectation. Keynes was devoid of micro-foundation, and Keynes was devoid of long run. It was only short run, etc., etc. So Keynes was right. Keynes was that the criticisms were right, correct, and that's why we go with the new classicals. Fine, that rational expectation, competitive capitalism, everything is fine, but still you cannot avoid Keynesian result. One such result we can discuss, that is, the famous menu cost model. Just briefly, heuristically, that so what we have, Keynes, what we had in simple Keynesian model, what we had actually something like this. In simple Keynesian model and ISLM, what we had, these are price fixed models, price rigidities. Why price rigidity? Because there was excess capacity unemployment. So the average cost, why there was actually price rigidity in simple Keynesian model and ISLM framework? Because of excess capacity unemployment. Why? This is the fundamental reason, that if you have excess capacity unemployment, your average cost is not like that. Rather, your average cost will be like this. And this is your excess capacity unemployment situation. That means average cost is constant. If average cost is constant, we know marginal cost is constant, and that's why price is constant. Now they give a very interesting alternative argument, that why price is constant in advanced capitalism. One explanation is menu cost. So what are they saying? That there is a restaurant menu. The menu, there are certain inputs, and you find that menu is changed very infrequently. Though the cost, the ingredient prices are changing fast, the menu costs, menu prices are not changing so fast. They are saying that by changing the menu, you can gain, of course, by raising the price, you can say gain an amount X. But for changing menu, you have a cost. And if this is the case, you should not change the menu so fast. You should change the menu only if X is greater than C. And this is called your menu cost. And that's why in whole of advanced capitalism, the prices do not fluctuate every moment, because there is many issues concerned. First of all, you have to inform the buyers. You have to convince the buyers. Not only inform, you have to convince the buyers. And after convincing, you can retain the buyers. So there is huge transaction cost. That's why I have written here, and it's not me, it's the researchers. Transaction cost is extremely important, which actually restricts the big companies in advanced capitalism, or corporates or firms in advanced capitalism, from changing prices so drastically. So now, if price is like this, that you have price is rigid, means what? If price is rigid, means your aggregate supply curve is horizontal. If your price is rigid, your aggregate supply curve is horizontal, and demand matters. So it's all about going back to Keynes. So they are giving actually rational expectation is there, nothing to do with the rational expectation. I simply calculate, okay, I change my price, fine. Now the buyers, I have to inform them, I have to convince them, and I have to retain through advertisement, etc., the whole lot of buyer and market I had. And for that, there is a huge cost. So long as the cost is greater than my gain, that is the marginal increase in price. So actually, how would the price change over long run? In the short run, the price is fixed. In the long run, so how should the prices change? This is the way. So the prices should change in the long run through this path. In the short run, there is stickiness, and then there is a jump, then there is a stickiness, then there is a jump. So and this is a prolonged period actually in terms of time. This is in terms of time. And during that period, government policy is very much relevant. So they bring in government intervention, the issue of government intervention through menu cost. Menu cost is one interesting aspect. As I don't have much time, I'm hurriedly going. Is it clear more or less? I cannot discuss more. So there is another very interesting model. Menu cost is introduced by Mankiw himself. And there is, Don Bush Fisher, Stanley Fisher, he had a very fantastic model of 2-period wage contract that is called staggered wage model. The first one is menu cost. The second one is staggered wage model. And what is that? It's basically the uncertainty or stickiness of contracts that is important here, which is generating a rigidity. Staggered wage means this. Say, today or 2021, 1st January. 2021, 1st January, a few people contract for 2 periods, 2021 and 2022. So for this period and then for this period, this is the wage. And some people contract for only 1 period. Now, this is a wage, the same wage. Say this is 100 rupees. This is also 100 rupees. Now, say here, and then there is a change in money supply at this point. When the money supply changes here, then these people can revise, say it increases, so price rises, these people revise money wage for the next year and say they make it 110 rupees. But these people cannot do anything, it remains 100. So the price has increased for these people as well. But the money wage is still remaining this, so the real wage is falling, and so the labor demand is rising, and so policy becomes relevant. So staggered wage, nothing to do with rational expectation, it's competitive capitalism, but it's contract, because capitalism is based on private property rights and contracts. From Coase theorem, there has to be well-defined property right and no transaction cost. Then 2 parties will bargain and they can reach simply the destined equilibrium, the long for the targeted equilibrium. So it's contract, that is very important. And they have simply contracted for 2 periods, and these people have contracted for 1 period, and these people have contracted for 2 periods. And that's possible. There's nothing problematic. But where is the problem? Problem is that you cannot constantly revise your contracts. That is actually destabilizes the market economy. So the stability of market economy demands stability of contracts. But stability of contracts makes room for government intervention. So that is the second argument. And the third argument is Stiglitz and others, and that is fantastic argument. That is most fundamental actually. Contribution, I would say, that the third one is rigidity of price because of coordination failure inherent in any advanced market economy. Market economy is a perfectly decentralized system. Perfect decentralization means market. And in a market decentralized system, there is no centralization, there is no coordination. So there is always a threat of coordination failure. And that creates huge rigidity. And you can have, I'm not discussing here, I discuss these things in higher classes, that you have, if you have a bargain, a Nash equilibrium kind of situation, a simply 2x2 bargain, Nash game matrix, then with that you can show that actually because of this problem of coordination failure, I can intuitively tell you that whole thing. Say I am a producer, you are a producer, I use your product, you use my product. Now if I produce, if I invest, but you don't, I am doomed. If you invest, I don't, you are doomed. Why? Because I use your product, you use my product. You don't produce means you are not using my inputs, then I'm doomed. And if I don't produce but you produce, then you are doomed. So there is always a hesitation in a coordination and a coordination failure. It's exactly a prisoner's dilemma kind of situation. And capitalism is based on decentralized. Capitalism doesn't want any kind of government intervention, coordinating or otherwise. Just government has to sit on the fence and it has to govern. So it should not tinker with the market. And that's why there is no question of coordination inherent in a decentralized, competitive, intensely competitive market economy. Who will coordinate? There's no question of coordination. So who will tell me whether you are producing or not? You should not. That is your confidential business information. Then why should I invest? How should I invest? There's no guarantee. And this actually makes investment rigid for you as well as for me. It's horrible. Your investment, you don't want to increase your investment when there is no guarantee. I don't want to increase my investment when there is no guarantee. And that's why what is happening now is exactly the same. Who will give the confidence? Who will be the guarantor? The US economy, the Biden administration is pumping in billions of trillions of dollars, not millions, not billions, trillions of dollars in infrastructure on the one hand, that is supply side, and $1,400 per head, not per family. That is on the demand side. And by that, they are trying to boost up the economy. So you need a big government, even in the US. And that shows that, and why? Because who will bail the cat? That is the question. I or you? Why? Because I don't know whether you are investing or not. It is exactly a prisoner's dilemma kind of game where the inferior option boils down to be the Nash equilibrium. So with this, we can stop here and we can I can stop here and we can discuss about the questions. So that is what new Keynesians are telling. They are resurrecting Keynes, and that's why they are new Keynesians. Why? This is new. They are following all the new classical assumptions of rational expectation, competition, etc., etc. But they are looking at more fundamental problems of a market economy, which is not resolved at all unless and otherwise government intervention is there. With this, I stop. Okay. So there are certain things that we may have a look. Let us have a look. Like this, I skipped all these things. Expectations are formed on the basis of all available relevant information concerning the variable being predicted. Just I discussed. Agents understand the underlying economic relationships. I told you the agents are like economists. Expectational error are not systematic. They don't do expectational errors. They know the workers' misperception is improbable, impossible. Workers' misperception is impossible. The new classical economics, they tell essentially classical economics with rational expectation. So classical economics talks about long-run policy relevance. They talk about even short-run policy relevance. In the short run, even in the short run, policy is irrelevant. The theoretical attack on Keynesian economics, I have mentioned all the theoretical attacks, and this can be termed as monetarism 2, because monetarism 1 is adaptive expectation, monetarism 2 is rational expectation without unanticipated shock. But rational expectation with unanticipated sudden shock could be termed as monetarism 1 once again, or monetarism 3. Then policy ineffectiveness or irrelevance, famous result. Real output and employment are unaffected by systematic or predictable changes, predictable, unannounced, predictable changes in aggregate demand policy, this monetary policy mostly, systematic or predictable. If policy changes are systematic, no unsystematic, therefore predictable, then agents will not make systematic mistakes in their forecasts. Agents recognize that mistakes are costly and will seek out all available information to avoid such mistakes. They will only make mistakes when they are surprised. Demonetization, unanticipated. Unanticipated policy changes will have short-run impact, but no long-run impact, just like monetarism. And this is the diagram that we had, E0 to En, straight away, even in the short run, no long run, short run dichotomy. These I have discussed for, and then the new classical, the new Keynesian, I'm sorry, the attempts to rebuild Keynesian arguments based upon rational expectations and microeconomic foundations. And then we discussed Fisher's model, Mankiw, Stiglitz, coordination failure, etc. And for them, once again, aggregate supply curve will be either horizontal, and this aggregate supply curve is also possible when money wage is rigid, and when that is the case, staggered wage model. So this upward rising thing is actually for the staggered wage model. But if it is coordination failure, that is price rigidity or quantity rigidity, then these are not the cases. Actually, you have the other situation like I don't invest means what? You don't invest means what? Even there is quantity resistance. There is not only price rigidity, there is output rigidity, which is more horrible. And that is the thing. I think that is the end of the. Okay. So if you have any question, please ask. So I've tried to discuss actually 70 years of macroeconomics. That is the thing. Okay. Any question you may ask. Is there any question?
Sir, is there any criticism of New Keynesians further?
There are certain, but not fundamental. There are certain criticisms, but not fundamental. And that's why, especially this pandemic and 2008-9 crisis, these have actually vindicated New Keynesian position, especially the current COVID crisis.
Sir, I have a request.
Yes,
can you
please.
suggest a book for New Keynesian?
Not only New Keynesian, for everything you could. There is one. Do one thing. You talk to the coordinator, Daya Shankar, and tell him to send me a mail. I have a book, soft copy, where you have this whole everything. And that is actually not a textbook, neither a reference book. It is actually a collection of articles by all the stalwarts, right from Friedman, Lucas, Mankiw, Fisher, everyone. So there you will have all the debates. It's a thick one, but you can only by and it's very interesting. Say you are talking about monetarism. Then the monetarism section you would find first of all like an introduction and then the articles. So like this, you can have introduction on Keynes by Mankiw himself, introduction on New Keynes, introduction on monetarism. And if you read those few pages, you would understand what are the fundamentals.
Okay, sir.
Please talk to the coordinator and tell him to mail me. Then I will send this book to you. I don't know. Some of the participants may be having that book.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Sir?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, actually, you have very nicely presented and clearly, explained. And as you have said,
Strongly support this. Strongly support.
Yes.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
The chart, the whole chart, from classical to New Keynesian, it is just like a total macroeconomics in just 4 pages. And
Thank you. Thank
excellent,
you.
excellent, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. But in the last few entries, there are a few corrections. Not corrections. You have to be a bit careful. Let me tell you just for the last time, because I won't be available. Just for once, because as you mentioned, you have to be careful about this entry actually. This one. So perfectly flexible price, wage, rate of interest, provided there are no rigidities. But if there are the rigidities, then price is fixed, wage is fixed, R is fixed, and different models are there. Few of them I tried to discuss in just 15 minutes, which is horribly insufficient. So please be careful about that. And like this, another paragraph is here. You have to be careful. Like free market smoothly functioning, provided there are no inherent rigidities. If there are rigidities, then there will be no free market kind of situation. There will be either no investment, or there will be price rigidity, or there will be wage rigidity or rate of interest rigidity, and which is far more practical than new classical or monetarism. Okay. Any other comment or question? Otherwise, I will have to,
Yes, sir.
because Daya Shankar needs to go to Durgapur, and which is
Hello, sir.
50, 60 kilometers away. And it's horrible.
Sir.
Big trucks will actually, big trucks are troublesome extremely. So may I stop?
Sir, I just want to mention one thing, sir. Just a
Yes,
comment.
please.
It's not a question at
Yes,
all.
please. Yes,
I
please.
am Dr. Rupam Mukherjee from
Yes.
Kobishukanta Mahavidyalaya and Assistant Professor in Economics.
Okay.
Sir, I must tell you that for the last 2 days, I was actually listening to your lecture, and I was feeling like a student in the undergrad, classroom. I must thank you for this exhaustive and
I am
minute
also a
hearing of
student. Let
everything.
me tell you very clearly. I consider myself as a student.
No, the way
And
you
it is
have
not
explained
humility at
everything.
all.
You have explained everything, sir. I think it has refreshed us, and all of us,
Thank
when
you.
we will go
Thank
back
you.
to our
Thank you.
college for our for students, it will help us immensely. Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm very happy that